When we look at the way the Mishkan was organized, we find that by the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan, everything was put in its proper place. So when you first came into the Beis Hamikdash, you went into the outer courtyard, which was the lowest level of Kedusha. Then you slowly went into the Azara, and within the Azara itself, there was the area outside where everybody was allowed to go, and then there was the inner area where it was only the Koyanim, and then there was the Heichal, which was even holier, and finally you got all the way in the end to the Kodesh HaKadosh. Everything seemed to be in the right place, in the right order. However, when reading the instructions about how to set everything up in this week's Parsha, there's one thing which seems out of place, right? What is that item? So the Torah tells us in Perek Mem, Pasuk Zayin, it speaks about the kiyar. The kiyar is the wash basin that the koyanim who walked into the Beis Hamikdash, they would have to wash their hands, right? Before they did any avodah, before they went to the Mizbeach, of course, they had to wash their hands. So you would expect that the wash basin, the sink, should be right at the entrance. For all the koyanim who are coming in, they can wash their hands before they go to do the avodah. However, the Torah doesn't say this. The Torah tells us, "V'nasata sakiyar bein oyel moyed ubein hamizbeach v'nasata shama moyed." You should put the kiyar, the wash basin, between the sanctuary and the altar, which means that it was actually behind the mizbeach, behind the altar. So a kohen who would come into the Beis Hamikdash would have to pass by the mizbeach, go to wash his hands, and then come back to the Mizbeach to do the Avodah, which seems a little bit strange, right? Obviously, you're not allowed to work on the Mizbeach without washing your hands. So why didn't they put the kiyar, the wash basin, in front before the Mizbeach? That way the kohanim could wash their hands before going to the altar. So Rab Naftali of Ropshitz studied under his Rebbe, Rab Mordechai of Neshchis, and he studied by him for many years. And one day, his Rebbe, Rab Mordechai, turned to him and he said, "You know, Naftali, it's time for you to leave and go home." Naftali was shocked. My Rebbe is sending me away? My Rebbe is telling me to leave? Rebbe, I want to stay with you. I want to continue learning with you. And the Rebbe says, "Right, now it's time for you to leave." He was not willing to accept this, and he decided he has to go speak to the Rebbitzin, right? So he went to Rab Mordechai's Rebbitzin, and he pleaded his case. He said, I'm learning by Rab Mordechai for so long. It's not right. I should be sent away. I need to be allowed to stay. And the Rebbitzin spoke to her husband, and finally Rab Mordechai agreed. He said, okay. He said, listen, I always listened. I always followed my wife's advice, and I hope it works out this time. So Rabbi Naftali was very excited. He got to stay by his Rebbe. And a few days go by. And one day, the door to the Rebbe's house opens and a stranger walks in. A stranger from the nearby town, a Jew who lived in one of the nearby villages. His name was Yitzchak, walked in. Naftali, who was sitting in the house alone, sees this Jew, Yitzchak, walking. And Naftali was a big tzaddik. He was a big Baal Ruach HaKodesh. He was able to look at a person, and he was able to tell what type of person this was. And he looks at Yitzchak's face, and he couldn't believe his eyes. Yitzchak's face is black with sin. Black from all the sins that he did. And Naftali starts yelling. He said, "How dare you come into the Rebbe's house? Someone like you, who's full of sin. Get out!" Yitzchak turns around, he runs out of the house, he runs back on the road. A few minutes later, the Rebbe comes home and he says, "What happened here?" And Naftali tells him, "This terrible sinner came to your house and I sent him away." The Rebbe says, No, run after him, bring him back right away. So Naftali runs out and chases after Yitzchak. He says, "Yitzchak, I don't know why, but for some reason the Rebbe wants you to come." Yitzchak comes back, and Rabbi Naftali welcomes him. Rabbi Mordechai welcomes him into the house with a big smile. He says, "I've been waiting for you. It's been a long time since you came here." And he says, "Yeah, Rebbe, it's been quite a while. I really miss the, I was really longing to speak to my Rebbe, to get a bracha from him. And the Mordechai took him into his room, and they spoke for a while, and then Yitzchak left. Rav Mordechai then calls in Rav Naftali, and he says, now do you know why I sent you away? He says, let me tell you what's going on with Yitzchak. Yitzchak lives in one of the villages nearby, and in his village there are no Jews who live there. He lives by himself, and it's very hard for him to live as a Jew should. It's very hard for him to live properly like a Jew should. But he makes an effort every once in a while to come to see me and to get inspiration from his Rebbe. But lately, for a long period of time, he hasn't come to visit me. And unfortunately, during that time, it's been very difficult for him to follow the ways of Torah and mitzvahs, and he slowly sunk into a life of sin. We know one sin leads to another, and slowly he kind of left the path of Torah, and he felt terrible, right? And he felt so guilty that he was afraid to come and see me. He said, how can I go to my Rebbe when my whole life is full of sin? And then he started thinking to himself, I'm living here in this little village, there are no other Jews, surrounded by Goyim, by Gentiles, and I live like a Gentile, right? I don't follow the Torah or mitzvahs, right? And I can't go to my Rebbe. My Rebbe would never accept me the way I am now. So maybe I should just leave Judaism behind me. Maybe I should convert and become a Goy. But then he thinks to himself, how can you do that? Right? You're a Jew? And he says, yeah, but what connection do I have to Judaism? And he's going back and forth. And finally he came to the decision, you know what? I'm going to try to go see my Rebbe. We'll see. If my Rebbe accepts me, then I know that I still have a way back. But if he chases me away, then I know where to go. And he says, I saw that, I realized that Yitzchak was coming a few days ago. And that's why I told you to leave. I realized that you wouldn't be a good influence on him. Right? Your message to him wouldn't be the right message. But, my wife convinced me to let you stay, but Baruch Hashem, things worked out well. So when we look at a Jew who doesn't live like a Jew, who doesn't live a life of Torah and mitzvahs, right? And he comes in front of Hashem, he comes in front of his Rebbe. What is Hashem's message to this Jew? Some of us might think Hashem will look at this person who's full of sin and say, you don't belong here, get out of here. But the Torah tells us that every Jew is like Hashem's only child. Hashem loves every Jew like an only child. A child, no matter where he is, his parents are always happy to welcome the child home. And this is true with even the greatest sinner. No matter where a person is in life. In the city of Masayev, this is in northern Ukraine, there lived a Jew named Herschel. Herschel was known as Herschel the Joker. He spent all of his time joking around, partying, drinking, and he usually found Herschel in the middle of the marketplace, surrounded by a group of people telling jokes, making fun of things. Nothing was holy in his life. Everything that we would consider holy for him was a mockery, something to poke fun at. And Herschel would travel around not just to the city of Messiah, but he would travel around to all the nearby cities. He was a cattle merchant, and he would travel around on business. And he was well known as Herschel the Joker, Herschel the Jester, wherever he went. One day, he travels to the city of Chernigov. He traveled to the city of Chernigov.
Was he religious?
He was a Jew, but he didn't live the way a Jew is supposed to. But he did some of the basic stuff. But most of his time wasn't spent the way a Jew spends his time. So he ends up in the city of Chernigov, in the marketplace, and of course he attracts a crowd, a bunch of people gathering around him. And as he's standing there making jokes in the middle of the marketplace, they see the rabbi of Chernigov approaching. The rabbi of Chernigov, his name was Reb Chaim Tirer. He was known as the Be'er Mayim Chaim. That was one of the Svarim that he wrote. And he was known, one of the things that he was famous for was the way he honored Shabbos. He actually wrote a book called Sidurei Shal Shabbos. And for him, his whole week, he would live for Shabbos. And he spent his whole week preparing for Shabbos. People say that when you looked at him on Shabbos, you wouldn't if you saw him during the week and then you saw him on Shabbos, you wouldn't recognize him. They said he was a head taller on Shabbos. I don't know what that means, but he looked completely different on Shabbos. Right? He truly experienced what Shabbos is supposed to be. What we should all feel on Shabbos, he actually felt. So Reb Chaim, the rabbi of Chernigov, is going around the market. And what's he doing in the marketplace? He's collecting money for tzedakah. And he sees Herschel, the joker, standing in the middle of the marketplace with his group of friends. And he figures he's not going to get much tzedakah over here. So he starts going around the group. But Herschel sees the rabbi and he calls out, "Hey, Rabbi, what are you doing here in the marketplace?" And the rabbi says, "Okay, fine." He comes. He says, "Listen, I'm collecting money. I'm collecting money. You know, Baruch was just Baruch, the innkeeper, was just imprisoned. Him and his family were arrested by the local duke. They didn't. He couldn't pay his rent. He couldn't pay the money that he owed the duke, and him and his family were just thrown into the dungeon 2 days ago. And I've been trying to collect money. They owe 1,500 zloty." And I'm trying to raise the money to free them. You know, a poor family languishing in a pit, in a dungeon. And, Shabbos is coming in another 2 days. Chas v'shalom, I don't want them to spend Shabbos there. So I'm trying to collect the money for him. He owes 1,500 zloty. Now, Herschel was about to make some funny joke at the expense of this poor innkeeper languishing in the dungeon. But suddenly he felt something in his heart, right? Yes. No matter where a Jew is, he has a neshama, a Jewish neshama, and something touched him inside. And we know that dvarim hayotzim min halev nichnasim el halev, words that come from the heart enter the heart. And obviously the rabbi was on this mission with all of his heart. And Herschel didn't understand what he was doing. He reached into his pockets, and he had brought with him 1,500 zloty to buy cattle. He takes out all the money that he had with him, and he says, here's the money you need to free Baruch and his family. The rabbi was shocked, and the people around were shocked as well. They thought this must be some type of joke, right? The rabbi's going to stick out his hand, and Herschel's going to yank the money away, right? They're waiting for the next for the punchline of the joke. And the rabbi also is a little bit hesitant, and Herschel says, "No, I'm serious. Here's the money." And the rabbi couldn't believe it. Reb Chaim takes the money from Herschel, and he says, "Wow, such a big mitzvah. How can I bless you? What bracha can I give you?" He wanted to give Herschel the greatest bracha. What type of bracha could he give? You can give him a bracha. You should have parnasa. Hashem should repay him for a tzedakah that he gave, maybe 10 times as much. But the rabbi felt this wouldn't be enough of a blessing. This wouldn't be a great enough blessing. He has to come up with a greater blessing. What's the greatest blessing you can give Herschel? So Reb Chaim turns to Herschel. Reb Chaim turns to Herschel, and he says, "In the merit of this great mitzvah that you did, I give you the blessing that you should experience the true taste of Shabbos." The true taste of Shabbos. Herschel has no idea what the rabbi is talking about, the true taste of Shabbos. He says, "Amen." Right? And the rabbi leaves, and Herschel goes back to his jokes, but it doesn't feel right. He doesn't have any money anyways in the marketplace. He figures he'll go home, right? He's not going to buy any cattle now. He used all of his money. He goes home, but he feels a little bit strange on the way back. The next morning, Friday morning, he wakes up Friday morning, and something's wrong. There's something going on inside of him. There's a fire burning inside of him. He wakes up and he says, "Shabbos is coming." Right? Shabbos is coming tonight. I have to do something about it. Right? He feels a fire of Shabbos burning inside of him. He jumps out of bed. He rushes out. He goes and he davens, and he rushes out to the marketplace to start buying food for Shabbos, to start preparing for Shabbos. He gets ready. He goes to the mikveh. He bathes. He dresses for Shabbos early. He goes to shul a few hours before Shabbos. He sits down in shul. He takes out a tehillim. He takes out some svarim. He starts learning and davening to prepare himself for the upcoming Shabbos. People walk into shul, and they see Herschel the joker, Herschel the Letz, sitting there in shul learning and davening. And They're like, what prank are you pulling now? Who are you, what's going on over here? But they see he's really involved. It looks serious. And they think, maybe Herschel, something cracked up there, right? Maybe he went insane, right? Something's wrong with him. But then somebody says, a few days ago, yesterday in the marketplace, he got a blessing from the rabbi that he should experience the true taste of Shabbos. And people are gathering around, they're watching Herschel preparing for Shabbos. Shabbos comes in and Herschel starts davening with such a fire, with such an enthusiasm. The whole Shabbos, Herschel is on a different world. He's on a different world. Shabbos ends, and suddenly the fire that was inside of him kind of goes away. And, he feels back to normal. Everything's back to normal. He goes back to his usual life, but it feels a little bit strange. It doesn't feel the way it used to. Another week goes by. The next Friday, again, he wakes up with a fire for Shabbos burning inside of him. Again, the next 2 days, he's learning and davening, preparing for Shabbos, enjoying Shabbos. And 2 days later, he's back to his normal joking and jesting. And this goes on for 2 months. And Herschel is being torn between the dual personalities that he has, right? The holiness, the great holiness, the fire of Shabbos on one side, and his life of drinking and joking and gossiping the rest of the week. And after 2 months, he feels that he can't take this any longer. He goes back to Chernigov, he goes to the rabbi, and he says, I can't do this. I can't live these two different lives, right? I can't live my ordinary life of a joker and a drunk and then celebrate Shabbos, have the taste of Shabbos. So Reb Chaim says, you know what? You're right. You really, you can't live two different lives. You have to allow the taste of Shabbos to change who you are the rest of the week as well. So Herschel's like, how do I do that? So he says, listen, you could stay here and I could teach you. And sure enough, Herschel stayed in Chernigov and he studied under Reb Chaim. And he became the closest and most devoted disciple of Reb Chaim, of the Be'er Mayim Chaim. And a few years later, when the Be'er Mayim Chaim left Ukraine and he traveled and settled in the city of Tzvas, his close disciple Herschel traveled with him. And today in the cemetery in Tzvas, you have the two graves of the Be'er Mayim Chaim and Herschel Masayev, as he was known, Herschel of Masayev, his closest student, right? So, we might look at this and think, Herschel, the joker, the jester, the drunk, right? What does he have to do with Shabbos? How could he have Shabbos in his life? How could he taste the true taste of Shabbos? But this is not the way Reb Chaim felt. Reb Chaim felt, no. Any Jew, if he truly merits it, if he does the proper mitzvah, if he wants to come close to Hashem, every Jew is worthy of having the taste of Shabbos if he can merit it. Right? What's going to happen with the rest of his life? He'll figure it out. Shabbos will have a positive influence on the rest of his life as well. We learned this week about the clothing, about the garments of the Kohanim. About the beautiful garments of the Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara tells us the famous story that there was a guy walking by the yeshiva, a Gentile walking by the yeshiva, and he hears the students in the yeshiva learning about these beautiful garments. And he comes inside, he sticks his head in, and he's like, who wore these beautiful garments? This golden plate with 12 gems. Who wore these beautiful garments? And they tell him, the Kohen Gadol wears it in the Beis HaMikdash. So he says, wow, I want to become a Kohen Gadol. Right? Wouldn't it be nice to wear these beautiful garments? So I want to become a Jew. How do I become a Jew and become a Kohen Gadol? So they tell him, you can go to one of the big rabbis, go to Reb Shammai. He'll help you out. So he goes to Reb Shammai. And Shammai says, what do you want? I want to become a Jew. Why do you want to become a Jew? Because I want to be the Kohen Gadol. I want to be the high priest in the Beis HaMikdash. Shammai takes out his stick and he says, get out of here. Right? Get out of here. That's not why you become a Jew. So he runs out. He doesn't know what to do. He was chased out of the rabbi's house. He starts asking around. Maybe there's some other rabbi who's a little more patient, a little more tolerant. And they tell him, yeah, Rabbi Hillel. Rabbi Hillel is known for his patience and tolerance. So he goes to Hillel, and Hillel says, you want to become a Kohen Gadol? You want to become a Jew? You first have to study Torah. So come, I'll start teaching you. So he teaches him how to read. He teaches him start teaching him Torah, and they're reading through the Sefer Torah. And finally they get to the pasuk in Bamidbar that says, Va'azor hakarev yumas. right, that any stranger who goes into the Beis Hamikdash should be put to death. No one's a stranger is not allowed to go into the inner parts of the Beis Hamikdash. So this guy, this convert, says to Hillel, "Who is the stranger that we're talking about over there?" So he says, "The stranger is anyone who is not a kohen. Even David HaMelech is not allowed to go into the Beis Hamikdash." So he says, "Well, even David HaMelech is not allowed to go into the Beis Hamikdash. Certainly me, a convert, I'm not allowed to be a kohen gadol, right? But listen, how did I studied so much? I want to continue studying." Right? And later the Gemara says he was very upset at Shammai. He says to Shammai, "Why did you push me away? Your intolerance pushed me away." Right? From Judaism, from Kedusha, and Hillel's patience brought me tachas kanfei Ashkina, under the wings of the Shechina. Right? So you could look at this person who's approaching, he wants to be the Kohen Gadol, he wants to become Jewish, but why does he want to do it? He's not serious. He doesn't really care about it. He wants to wear some precious gems. He wants to wear nice clothing, right? What do you tell such a person? You could adopt the approach of Shammai and say, "Get out of here! You don't belong here. It's not for you, right? You want to become a Jew. You want to study Torah. You have to take it seriously. You have to purify yourself, right?" But this is not what Hillel says. Hillel says no. Hillel says, "You want to come? Come the way you are. Slowly over time, we'll help you out. You'll purify yourself. You'll clean yourself. You'll improve. You'll become better." And this is how we bring somebody under the wings of the Shekhinah. There's a famous parable that's said over in the name of Reb Nachman of Breslov. He says there was once a great king and a queen who had a son, a prince, a young prince. This young prince was... Usually he was a very intelligent boy, but one day something cracked upstairs, right? Something went wrong in his brain. And he decided that he wasn't a prince. He decided that he was a turkey. He decided he was a turkey, right? This boy decides he's a turkey. So he gets down on the floor, he takes off his clothes, and he starts crawling around under the table, pecking at little crumbs of bread. The king quickly calls in the doctors to examine him, and they try to talk to him, they try to give him medicine, and nothing works. He's a turkey. What do you mean you're a turkey? You're a prince. Gobble, 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 right? Running around on the floor, making turkey noises, eating crumbs of bread. They bring in all different psychologists, psychiatrists from all over the kingdom. And no one's able to help the prince. Finally, a wise man from a distant land hears about this problem, and he comes to the king's palace. He says, "I can help the prince, but on one condition. You cannot question my approach. What I'm going to do is going to look strange, but let me do my thing." Okay, sure. The king has no other option, right? He wants his son back. Doesn't want his turkey crawling around under the table. And so this wise man walks into the palace. He walks into the king's dining room. He removes all of his clothing, and he gets down under the table together with the prince. The prince looks up, and he starts yelling, "Gobble, gobble, gobble! What are you doing here? Gobble, gobble!" And the wise man says, "Gobble, gobble, gobble! What are you doing here?" And he says, "Gobble, gobble, gobble! I'm a turkey!" And the wise man says, "Gobble, gobble, gobble! I'm also a turkey!" "Oh, wow! Gobble, gobble! Oh, wonderful! Another turkey! Gobble, gobble, gobble!" They start pecking on the floor. They're eating crumbs of bread. And they have now, instead of one turkey, you have two turkeys walking around under the table. Right?
Strange.
A couple of days go by. The wise man, one morning, he comes in and he says, "Good morning," to the prince. The prince says, "Gobble, gobble! What's good morning? Gobble, gobble!" And he says, "Gobble, gobble, we're turkeys, but who says turkeys can't say good morning to each other?" Right? So the prince is a little confused. He says, "Turkeys go gobble, gobble." And he says, "Well, that's simple. Turkeys aren't intelligent. Who says turkeys can't be multilingual? Right? Turkeys can also have intelligent discussions. Right? Just because we're turkeys, does that mean we have to gobble, gobble all day? We can also have nice conversations. We can also wish each other good morning." And the prince thinks about it for a minute, and he says, "Gobble, gobble, you're right. We're smart turkeys. We're intelligent turkeys. We can have intelligent conversations. So they're sitting there naked under the table, pecking on the crumbs of bread, but now they're sitting and talking to each other. They're having interesting conversations with each other. They're talking about what life as a turkey is. They're having a good time. Another few days go by, and the wise man comes one morning, and he's wearing a shirt. And the prince looks at him, and he gets angry. He says, "Aren't you a turkey? What are you wearing a shirt for?" So he says, "Who says turkeys can't wear shirts? Right? Just because we're turkeys, that means we're not allowed to wear shirts? Shirts are comfortable. They look nice. They keep me warm. It's pretty cold under the table over here. You should also wear a shirt." And the prince says, "You're right. Why should only people get to wear shirts? Turkeys can also wear shirts." Okay, so the prince wears a shirt. The next day, the wise man comes with pants. And again, turkeys can wear pants, right? Pretty soon, they're wearing shoes. They're all dressed. But they're still turkeys. They're crawling around under the table, eating crumbs of bread. Another few days go by, and the wise man sticks his hand up over the table, and he takes a plate of food. And the prince looks at him, and he's like, "We're turkeys. What are you eating food from the table? We're supposed to eat the crumbs of bread on the floor." And he says, "Who says turkeys can't eat good food? Right? Why should only people get to eat good food? Turkeys can also eat good food." The prince says, "You're right." So the prince also starts eating good food. I know. What? I don't know what was on the plate. I'm not sure what was on the plate, but and another few days go by, and this time the wise man crawls out from under the table and he sits down on the chair. He sits down on one of the chairs at the royal table. And this time the prince starts yelling at him and he says, "What are you doing sitting at the royal table? You're a turkey." He says, "Who says that turkeys can't sit at the royal table? Turkeys can also sit at the king's table, right? Why should only people get to sit at the royal table? Turkeys can also sit at the king's table." So the prince gets up and he sits down at the king's table, and he remained a turkey. For the rest of his life, he was a turkey, but he was sitting at the king's table. He was wearing clothing. He was having normal conversations. He lived his life like a person who was also a turkey. So what's the point of the story? The point of the story is that we sometimes look at ourselves and we think, we're turkeys. Sometimes we feel like a turkey. Maybe even not. Maybe we might choose an animal that might be a little bit worse than a turkey, which we're not going to mention over here, right? And we're going to say, me, I'm not a person. I'm a behemoth. I'm a whatever. How can I sit at the royal table? So one approach is, you have to bring in the psychologist, the psychiatrist. They have to work on the prince. They have to try to change him and convince him that he's not a turkey. And then he can come back to the king's table. But the true wise man comes along and says, "No, you don't have to change the turkey into a prince. He could stay a turkey, but the turkey can also come and sit at the king's table." Right? No matter where we are, we're always welcome at Hashem's table, at our Father's table. And Hashem is willing to welcome every one of us, no matter where we are. And this is why, when they're setting up the Mishkan, and they're setting up the wash basin, the kiyar, where the kohanim have to wash their hands before they serve Hashem. Hashem says, "I want you to place the wash basin behind the Mizbeach. I don't want you to put the wash basin in front of the Mizbeach and say, you know what? Anybody who wants to go to the Mizbeach, anybody who wants to serve Hashem, has to first wash their hands. Until you wash your hands, you're not welcome." Says the Torah, no. It's true that an ordinary kohen who wants to go to the Mizbeach has to first wash their hands. But I don't want the wash basin to block somebody who's coming to serve Hashem. A kohen who's coming to serve Hashem and his hands are impure. We don't tell him, "Sorry, you can't come. You can't come close to the Mizbeach because your hands are unclean." So the Torah tells us, no. The kiyar goes behind the Mizbeach. Hashem says to the kohen, "You're welcome to come into the Azara. You're welcome to pass by the Mizbeach even before your hands are clean." Obviously, we want you to clean your hands, but don't think that you're not welcome until your hands are clean. Even while you're a turkey, you're still welcome to come and sit at the king's table. Chaim. And of course, the lesson for all of us is both for ourselves and for others. Right? For ourselves, even when we feel that our hands are dirty, even when we feel that we're a turkey, that we're an animal, we should know that we're always welcome at the king's table. And the other side of the coin is that when we deal with other people, we might look at and say, this person, look what type of life he's living. Right? Look how his face is black with sin. Could he come to the Rebbe's house? Could you go into the street? This Jew just committed so many sins. I put on tefillin with this person. So Hashem says yes. Yes, even wherever the person finds himself, no matter what his situation is, no matter how many sins he just committed, this turkey is welcome at the king's table. L'chaim, l'chaim.